legal work to over 60 different types of state agencies. Some of the areas that you're very familiar with, we enforce the laws of West Virginia as they relate to consumer protection, antitrust, civil rights, and we've had a lot of high-profile cases in those areas over the years. And of course, very importantly, we represent the state in all criminal appeals before the West Virginia Supreme Court and in federal courts. And we have typically 8 to 10 people that are engaged in that activity. Very brief background in terms of how we set up our office structure. We obviously spend a great deal of time ensuring that all of the attorneys have adequate front office support. And I think that's actually been very effective over the last six years because, one, we've spent less efficiencies we brought to bear, and in part because last year a lot of the work we were doing for workers' comp, that division had completed a lot of its activity. Administrative division, responsible for the day-to-day operations of the office and the personnel matters. Our appellate division is actually quite important because we literally serve as the law firm for the state, and after the counties finish up their work at the local level, we inherit all of their work before the West Virginia Supreme Court and in the federal courts. And that takes up a lot of time. In recent years, we've absorbed the appellate work from Jefferson and Berkeley counties. That's actually taking up a bit of time as well. There were some of the outliers that existed in the past, but both of those prosecutors asked for help from us because they thought that it made sense that the state AG represented all 55 counties before the court. There's an advantage to having that consistency. Obviously, as I mentioned, we do a lot of work for our client services. We serve clients. The Attorney General functions in a variety of roles. We both serve clients, specific state agencies, and individuals such as the governor, the Secretary of State, the treasurer, the auditor, and designated officials under the code. But we also speak for the people as a whole. So we have independent authority to act and file suits in a variety of manners. Budget savings, always one of my favorite slides. Our office in recent years has returned over $40 million in unencumbered monies, and we always try to make resources available for this committee. And going forward, we're going to look to work with this committee for resources that we may be able to provide back this year as well, because this is an ongoing opportunity to continue to work with the legislature. This is the people's money. We have great respect for it, and we run the railroad efficiently, and we're going to continue to do so and respect the role of the legislature in the process. I would add that in addition to the direct budget savings that we provide to the legislature and to the people, we also have saved literally many hundreds of millions of dollars for the taxpayers of our state. Obviously defending various settlements. We have ongoing requirements to defend the state's tobacco settlement, which many times has resulted in $55, $60 million in a particular year that comes back for the bondholders. But that's an ongoing obligation that the office has. It doesn't get discussed very much, but we have to make sure that we work with we formed a cooperative disability unit program, and we work with the Social Security Administration and with the folks here in the executive branch and the OIG to try to identify disability fraud. In most cases, what we're trying to do is identify the fraud before it actually occurs, ensuring that the people that are applying for disability benefits, in fact, qualify for it. We're proud to report that through our work, we've saved over $13 million, and I believe that we're going to have some updated figures from the past quarter. That's good government, and that's something we should always be doing. And that's really primarily from the work of 3 people from our office, and obviously partners within the other agencies. That's a pretty good return on investment in terms of the dollars that the state gets back. And I would argue that if you do the same thing for Medicaid fraud, I've been asking the legislature about this for a number of years, we will more than increase your investment, I promise you that. We're aggressive. You need to be aggressive when you go after fraud. And it makes a lot of sense to have someone in place and an office in place that is the experience of chasing fraud, whether it's consumer fraud or disability fraud. Very few states don't have their state attorney general pursuing Medicaid fraud. We need to change that. And I think West Virginia citizens would benefit a great deal as a result. The other major change we made when I took office is that we instituted competitive bidding for our outside counsel, and we've saved many millions of dollars as a result. Direct savings in terms of the lowering of any of the contingency rates that may be out there, but also by virtue of getting the bids, we're able to convince law firms to bid whenever we need it for lower prices. That's good for the state of West Virginia and her citizens, and we're going to keep doing that. As you know, if you have to work with an outside firm, we have to pay frequently 3 times the rates of the people that are working in our office. So while we have to, from time to time, of course, go to outside counsel, because of the emergent need of a particular case, we like to do as much work as we can in-house. That saves more money. Our budget request we've drafted consistent with the 100% current level of funding, and our specific request for this committee is that you transfer the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit to the Attorney General's office. I'm hopeful this is the year that folks take advantage of the savings opportunities and the quality that you can bring to bear if you move that division and you're consistent with what 43 other states do. West Virginia shouldn't be an outlier. West Virginia should save more money, and we should ensure that monies that are saved, the beneficiaries, the taxpayers, benefit from that. So, Mr. Chairman, that is my presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
Well, thank you, Patrick. And ladies and gentlemen, this is his presentation, and on the back is the budget. Just so you know, Mr. Attorney General, it's my honor to get the opportunity to have you sworn in, because now we're in the question process. So.
Yeah.
No, I'll let you do it.
Okay, please raise your right hand and state your name. State your name, please.
Patrick Morrissey?
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and
Okay, do we have questions for our Attorney General? The gentleman from the 16th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for presenting this morning. If the legislature chose to give you that authority to go after the Medicaid fraud, what would be the financial implications to us as in funding that ability, and also what would be the return on our investment? I know that may be somewhat unclear, but given that 43 other states have done this, what was the return on their investment that they saw?
Well, we believe that there are activities that we could engage in that benefit the state as a whole by virtue of having the Medicaid fraud unit in our division. And here's why. When 43 states house their Medicaid fraud control unit within the AG's office, there's a lot of collaboration that goes on between the states. Obviously, there are multi-state settlements that occur. We go to all those meetings. We're at the NAG meetings, National Association of Attorneys General. Frequently, people are getting together. They're talking about strategies to go after Medicaid fraud. We're working together on those issues. I think collaboratively, states do try to work together across the partisanship, which I think is very positive. So, issues, federal financial participation, because revenue gets implicated there. We want to leverage all of those resources in order to develop additional theories and bring more money.
To the beginning of your presentation, sir. I was running a few minutes late. I appreciate your comments on, your request for the, authorities to go after fraud. I guess as Willie Sutton once quipped, or purportedly quipped, when he was asked why he robs banks, he said, well, I rob banks because that's where the money is. And, as we look, certainly we've worked to, try, and we continue to work to try to look at probably the biggest area of money, which is education, but right after that is, DHHR or Human Services, and it just, I mean, would you agree?
Appropriate. I think when you see that, you start to see those trends as they believe that one office that has the normal skills to go after fraud and abuse, it would make sense to extend that to arguably what is the second largest program in the state of West Virginia. This is about budget savings, and I think it could be very beneficial.
Well, thank you. Look forward to working with you to hopefully make that happen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Thank you, Delegate. Further questions? The gentleman from the 30th.
Sure.
I'm looking on the last page of the materials I handed out, and the table that's used to show fiscal year 2019 under Special Revenue Non-Appropriated Consumer Protection Recovery Fund.
Can you, which page is this? I just want to make sure.
That's the last page of the material we handed out. It's the
Okay.
tablet form.
Yep.
And out to the side there, the spending authority there is 4.1 million. The cash balance is 10.7 million. It says net funds encumbered for restitution. Can you explain to me what that means?
Oh, sure. So when you have consumer protection cases, there are a variety of different types of settlements that may occur. You may get a settlement that goes directly back to the state of West Virginia. We hold basically within our office. As you know, the Consumer Protection Division relies on special revenue account. Basically, we pay for ourselves. So you use a portion of those dollars to pay for the activities of the office. And then we have returned quite a bit of money back to the legislature in recent years. Frequently, when you get into a case, you might actually have a judge order, or we may reach a settlement with a company that would direct that company to provide restitution to victims of that particular action. So right now, I believe we have several $1 million within that fund that we're identifying, we're trying to send back to specific consumers or entities as required by court orders or other settlements. So that's the basic purpose. Its restitution is different because it's intended to go back to consumers or dedicated entities.
So you spoke of the fact that in previous years there's been sweeps that have occurred to remove monies
Sure.
from those accounts. So if I'm looking at this correctly, the $4.1 million that's there under spending authority is monies that's there for the operation of that division. And
That's from an annual perspective. What we've always tried to do within the Consumer Protection Division is maintain at least 2 to 3 years of resources, because as you well know, when you're involved in a law firm, we're basically seeding a lot of these cases. When we file a lawsuit, it may take years to resolve that lawsuit. And while we've obviously been able to return a lot of money over the years to the legislature and the taxpayers, you don't want to be in a position where you could run out of resources or have questions about whether you should file a case. They have had separate outside counsel authority. They've spent money over the years. We don't control those expenditures, so it's hard for us to track all of that information. Obviously, within the specific purview of consumer protection or other areas that we directly control, we absolutely have that information, and we can gather that, if that helps.
So you have information regarding outside counsel that's been retained by your office, but there are other agencies that are retaining outside counsel that's outside your.
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, there's information out there that it would be publicly available through the auditor and other information, but we don't have that because we don't control the flow of the money.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Delegate. Further questions? Gentleman from the 36th.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for
Sure.
being here this morning. I wanted to go to, and I see it's page 13,
Okay.
and it has the current financial position. And it looks like it's what you're requesting. Has the chart. Budget request for fiscal year 2020.
What page?
This is that you all are requesting exactly what you had last year. Is that right? No increase?
That's correct. Now, I think we had prepared this prior to the governor's announcement the other day with respect to the pay raise. So, Chamian, correct me if I'm wrong, but this does not include the proposed governor's pay raise. It does not. So I just mentioned that so you have knowledge of that.
But other than that, you're requesting what you had.
Correct.
For what is that for?
Well, it's one of the divisions we work on to ensure the integrity of the office. So for instance, we approve all contracts to form in the state of West Virginia. We have a number of people that are involved in that. The state of West Virginia produces a lot of contracts every single year. So that division tends to fund a number of our compliance activities, including contract review, et cetera.
I was reading it to be a private entity, but you're saying it's the
No.
Bureau for?
Internal. Yeah, it's actually internal. It's one of our, it's part of our office.
You note in the paragraph right below that you all have returned millions of dollars to the General
Sure.
Revenue Fund. And I'm wondering, do you anticipate that this budget amount, as you've requested, will produce any savings that would allow you to pay back in,
Yeah,
say,
we are-
even next year, perhaps?
Delegates, a great question. We are very hopeful to come to the committee and to the chairman and present some information where you can realize some of the savings. I'm a big believer in returning money back, so I anticipate that there will be some resources that will get returned.
And maybe I have trouble sometimes reading the little chart in the back, but how much do you have on hand that you would have available for litigation expenses or whatever you might need to be able
Well,
to do?
we obviously have different buckets because as you know, we have the traditional general revenue dollars, and then you have the consumer protection division. We know that we have, I'll look to Jamie on this, probably a little over $10 million when you deduct the restitution right now. Once again, we try to keep 2.5, 3 years. I know there's always been some debate about that. I believe very firmly that we need to protect the integrity of the office. But I think it's about $10+ million. I'll have to check on the numbers.
Okay, well, so sort of following up on that, in looking at the chart that's on the back.
Sure.
I'm wondering, there's an indication of federal revenue. And there's no line in there, but there's.
I'm not aware that we receive any federal revenue.
it's just
This is
yeah.
a chart consistent with how other departments and divisions do, but we are a little bit different than others because we don't get direct federal revenue in.
Now, you mentioned $10 million. Is that the non-appropriated? I'm in the middle of the chart. It says Office of the West Virginia Attorney General, and then it says non-appropriated special revenue. Would that be the funds that you're speaking of?
Yes,
Just
yes.
consumer protection?
that's consumer protection.
Well, now, if you participate, say, in a lawsuit out of state, would those be the funds that you use, or would they come out of the budgeted funds?
No, they would come in if we have settlements that come in from multi-states or actions we initiate on our own, all that money would be housed within the consumer protection account.
Okay, so that would be the amount that you could
Correct.
use. But would that be appropriate for litigation expenses in those
Yes,
cases?
yes.
Or would you be looking for,
No, there wouldn't be
Out of the
separate,
budget.
there wouldn't be separate resources for our consumer protection division. Now, as you know, Delegate, we represent over 60 different state agencies and boards, and so there's ongoing work that we do and appropriations work. But this that we're talking about, this over $10 million number, is the consumer protection division if there's litigation in that space.
in regard only to consumer protection?
Correct.
Okay, now what about, I saw that you had represented the state in terms of, I don't know if it's litigation, but the handgun
Yeah.
permitting. Now, the expenses associated with that, would that be a part of your office expense, or would that
That's
come
part
out
of our office expense. That's distinct from, say, a consumer protection lawsuit.
Now, what about I was looking, I think there's an you've represented the state in the EPA
Correct.
lawsuit. For example, in that one, would those expenses again be?
General revenue.
That
So
they would come
separate
out of
from
that-
consumer protection.
That would be the budget, not
Correct.
if you needed $1 million for expert fees or something, it sounds outrageous, but expert fees can be incredible. Would that come out of your budget, or would you have funds held back and available?
It's a good question. So, sir, that would depend upon the nature of the action. If it's a consumer protection action, that would come out of the Consumer Protection Fund. If it's an antitrust action, if we have resources there, that would come out of the antitrust bucket. If it's something that's unrelated to those two, presumably that would come out of the traditional general revenue appropriation.
Now, how much do you have available, say, for antitrust? Do you have a balance available for that? Again, I'm on the back page, and I don't know that that's the right place for me to
Yeah, I
be.
don't know that this is an updated number. Jamie, do you have the updated
Well,
number?
there's an
The top line there, 1507, is our antitrust fund, and yes, net of the encumbered.
Hey,
constitution.
Jamie, actually, we're going to have you come up to testify, and we'll have to get you sworn in.
Please raise your right hand and state your name.
Jamie M. Wolford.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
If you would, print your name and then sign.
See, I see this 46, but it says from 1918. Is that an error?
The 18, yes.
It's an error, yeah, that's
I
why.
apologize.
Just introduce yourself to the committee, then I'll have the question asked.
My name is Jamie M. Wolford. I'm the CFO for the office, and here to answer any questions I can. So.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, if I may, Mr. President. Thank you very much for being here. I was just trying to figure out how you handle what could be very expensive litigation costs. I mean, you could spend amazing amounts of money, and if you don't have funds available, I'm just wondering if what comes out of the general revenue funds in your budget versus the funds that you have.
Sure.
I understand you've got $10 million for consumer protection, which would be like, I think you had a bus case, maybe a travel bus case. The antitrust, it looks like it's only $46,000.
Yeah,
Is
that's
that,
the question that we should.
or is that?
So, in looking at the page that you're referencing, Delegate, there is, and I apologize because that should be 1/9 of 19 as the date. So anyways, that's my fault for the date there. And so that is an updated number of the $46,759 is currently what is just available for operations in our antitrust fund.
Okay. And would that be the like if you had a $50,000 litigation expense, would you get it out of there, or would you find it as a part of your budget?
Yeah, so, look, if you have an antitrust matter, we can draw down from that antitrust account. So obviously, that account is in a different state than the consumer account, because one of the differences about antitrust, that once you get to a certain balance of spending authority of $831,000, that, at the end of that year, that gets swept back to the government. So if you go a couple years or a year without funding, that could drop. Down. Now, we always have a number of cases that we're kind of bread and butter multi-states. You might, I mean, I'll give you an example for some of the LIBOR cases. I remember distinctly that we paid money up front, or we had a commitment, and I don't recall the exact amount that we did a number of years ago, but we paid it up front because that helped pay for the experts out front, because some of these these experts might have to wait 4 or 5 years or 6 years to get the money back. But there are other scenarios where you might just bear your own costs going forward in the matter. And also, you might have NAG, the National Association, involved. Let's say there's a case, right now, a lot of the drug litigation, every state is involved in all of the investigations, litigations against drug companies, I think all 50. So you might get NAG involved in that as well. And then NAG, after a settlement comes in, may take a piece of that to reflect the expenditures for experts, for other types of fees.
Now, if I may ask, on the pre-need burial, which is right at the top, under the antitrust enforcement, pre-need burial contract, there's spending authority of 266,000, and then there's 196. What does that represent? Are those actual deposits by consumers, or is that a fund for litigation?
So the pre-need burial, we do have two funds there, and the fund I believe that you're referencing, Delegate, is our what we consider more of the operating or the regulation fund. And so out of there, mostly it's salaries, but also and make those consumers whole.
There has been.
Yes,
There
they're
have been defaults.
yeah.
The 900,000, is that, when it says spending authority, does that mean that's what would be in the budget and available?
So,
spending?
yes, that is the spending authority that we would have if there was a default that we would be required to pay out. And so even though there's, only 700,000 in cash there that you're seeing, there's also some investments that could be drawn upon. But anyways, but that is the spending authority we would have. We could go up to that amount.
Now, are these numbers, the spending authority, reflected in the chart that we had over here of the budget?
Not in the general fund numbers, no.
Okay.
Yeah,
These would be
that's
special
just our
funds.
general fund appropriation request.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there further questions for Mr. Wolford? We had asked for leave of committee for Mr. Wolford. No further questions for Mr. Wolford. All right, thank you, sir. Thank you. The gentleman from the 34th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Morrissey, welcome.
Thank you, Delegate.
You made mention to it earlier, and I apologize for being a few moments late. Just to touch base on something that you and I have talked about over the years, there is nothing in code that allows 2.5, 3 years of funding in consumer protection or any other fund in your office. It's basically a policy decision. Is that correct?
This is something that's been in place from yes, for a long time. Before I took office, there was a lot of the general revenue. You can't predict when the money is going to come in.
Granted, but it's not in code.
No.
It's just a policy decision by the legislature.
Yes, and they've been respecting it for a number of years.
Okay. Secondly, on your consumer protection monies, do you have the ability to move that in and out of other areas within your budget beyond just consumer protection?
We don't, or at least historically, we haven't transferred consumer protection monies back and forth. So there's always an open question as to what the ability to move some of these dollars are, but we have never moved those monies to the best of my knowledge.
So there wouldn't be any plans to do that without coming back and seeking
Correct.
additional?
Yeah, for instance, I'm not aware that we have ever done a transfer between the Consumer Protection Division and General Revenue, or the Consumer Protection Division and any other account, special revenue, any other general revenue account within our office.
Unless the legislature did it in
We would
in-
want to
in
come to
a-
you and talk
in
to
a-
you about things like that.
If we were looking for additional funds someplace, that would be an area we've gone to in the past if the balance has been deemed to be too large.
Well, certainly, we've returned money back through the Consumer Protection Division to the legislature, and sometimes I think that the legislature has applied it towards specific types of activities. So certainly, that's the prerogative of the legislature.
Correct. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. The gentlelady from the 38th.
I don't know
This question I don't know who's going to answer it, so I hope it's the Attorney General. But thank you for being here today, and I hope everyone else on the committee appreciates the fiscal responsibility the way I do, that your budget requests are flat, and I appreciate that attribute of your office. I'm just as an auditor, it's not a very big amount, but there on page 13, there's $24,428 in an unclassified account. And that's the first thing I look at when I'm auditing is the miscellaneous account. I'm just curious, if you've broken out $1,000 for equipment, why there'd be $24,000 in just some unclassified? I'm curious if you know what that is.
Well, I think this is consistent with how all state departments and agencies have operated. So sometimes they give you the unclassified account to address any needs that might not appear within this. Obviously, we didn't come up with the budget table that's been in existence for a long period of time, but the way we try to operate this, obviously, personal services is a specific line item, but we obviously look at all the different buckets and we try to ensure that, we plan as a budget as a whole, right, based upon expenditures for the office. So we certainly try to use the unclassified in a way not inconsistent with other line items.
I can understand that, but I still don't know what's actually in there. Why do you need $24,000 in your unclassified? What do you use it for?
I believe the state code allows up to 1% in unclassified, I believe. Am I correct?
So do you know what it's typically used for? What you spend that money on?
It could be used for a variety of different expenditures, and so, obviously, you may have repairs and alterations, and maybe there's extra repairs in a particular year. You might use the unclassified if your repairs exceed $1,000, which is, we have a flood in our office, right? I think you've probably read about that. We got hit pretty hard by that. We're still trying to assess what some of the damage might be.
Okay, so it's just truly a miscellaneous account where you tap it if you need it for some, okay, I was just curious if you knew. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Delegate. The gentleman from the 61st.
Medical cannabis, are you aware of that line item?
I'm not aware of that line item. Thank you for letting me know about it.
Is the opinion that you're going to issue today at noon, do you see that could have any impact on the state's ability to utilize that
I'm going to defer all questions on
$4 million?
medical cannabis to the issuance of our legal opinion at noon,
Fair enough.
because that's what I've announced. And just so people understand, we had a request from the Speaker of the House. We had a request from the Treasurer. We tried to spend a lot of time trying to be thoughtful in the handling of these issues. And so we've talked to both of them, and we're going to try to make that available to them, and then we'll try to make it publicly available at noon or around that.
So after noon, I'll know the answer to that question at noon.
I will leave this to noon, and then we can begin a broader discussion, and I'm happy to talk about all these issues post-release of our opinion letter.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate. The gentleman from the 16th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again, Mr. AG.
Sure.
The first thing I would ask is that in the unclassified account, that's not going to be a $24,428 couch or anything, right?
I can very safely tell you that when I came into office, I did not invest in 32,000
here is on the Frontier. $500,000 was placed in the Consumer Protection Fund, and that your office is continuing to monitor the progress of the terms of that settlement. Can you give me an idea of how you're monitoring that, what the costs associated with those are, and if you're perhaps working with the Broadband Council, which I also serve on, monitoring for things like the speed test data that users are voluntarily submitting, and also potentially figuring out if any of those other providers are acting in a similar fashion to Frontier?
Yeah, good questions, Delegate. First of all, after our Frontier settlement, we had actually conducted a review of similarly situated entities to see if some of the same legal liabilities would apply to those services, and we actually concluded that they did not, so that Frontier, we thought, had a different fact pattern than some of the other entities. So we monitor the Frontier settlement on a regular basis. In fact, we've been receiving quarterly reports for a number of years on that, and I think we probably should have a report forthcoming soon. And we can make all of those reports available to you. I think that we've redacted some of the proprietary information, but we will make everything available that's publicly appropriate.
I would appreciate that if
Yeah.
you would do that. Thank you, Mr. Agee.
Sure.
Thank
All
you,
right,
Mr.
thank you,
Chairman.
Delegate. Further questions? Further questions? All right, this concludes the presentation from the Attorney General. Appreciate it. Good job.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair calls on the gentleman from the 10th for the purposes of the motion.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we stand in recess